He was cruel. But her hidden illness turned a Mafia boss into a caretaker. Naomi leaned over the mahogany bar at the Velvet Room, her hands gripping the edge as her body trembled uncontrollably. Cold sweat slicked her dark skin, and her black button-down shirt clung to her frame. The lounge was packed, glasses clinking and low murmurs filling the space, but she barely noticed. Across the room, Dominic Castellano sat in his usual corner booth. His sharp Italian suit was flawless, rings catching the amber light, gray eyes scanning the bar. 3 associates flanked him, quiet but alert. A tray of premium vodka bottles toppled from Naomi's hands, shattering across the marble floor. The lounge went silent. Dominic rose instantly, his face dark with fury, striding toward her. She wasn't scrambling to apologize. She was trembling violently, eyes unfocused, whispering, I need, before her legs gave out. He caught her just in time, her weight nearly nothing in his arms. For the first time, his gaze fell on the medical alert bracelet hidden under her sleeve. Type 1 diabetic. What could possibly transform a man known for ruthless cruelty into someone who would drop everything to save the woman he'd spent months tormenting? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments and hit subscribe. Tomorrow, another story arrives that you won't want to miss, and your support brings more powerful stories to life. Let's begin. Naomi Fletcher had learned to live in motion. At 29, she split her life between 2 jobs, both exhausting in their own ways. Mornings began at a small coffee shop in the Loop, the aroma of roasted beans filling the cramped space as she moved through the orders, balancing precision with speed. By 4 in the afternoon, she was behind the bar at the Velvet Room in River North, her attention pulled in every direction at once. The contrast between the 2 worlds was stark. The coffee shop, a bustling neighborhood hub where regulars expected smiles and small talk, and the Velvet Room, a sanctuary of Chicago's elite and those who ran the city's shadows. She had come to Chicago 4 years earlier, carrying grief and resolve from the loss of her mother. Atlanta's West End had been her anchor, but she had needed to forge a new life. The studio apartment she rented in Bronzeville barely covered her rent, yet it represented independence, a space all her own. Naomi managed her type 1 diabetes quietly, a condition she had lived with since she was 14. Insulin injections, blood sugar checks, and carbohydrate calculations were woven into her day, though no one around her ever knew. Health insurance was a luxury she could not afford. The $380 monthly cost of insulin alone was a burden she managed by rationing doses, a gamble she could not afford to lose. Over the years, small complications had begun. Blurred vision, numbness in her feet, the early warning signs that her body was paying for these compromises. Naomi had learned the cost of revealing vulnerability. Loss of work, strained relationships, the risk of dependence. So she built a careful barrier around herself. Dominic Castellano occupied a world where control defined every interaction. At 35, he had inherited a criminal empire at 28. The result of a calculated succession after his father's assassination. He oversaw illegal gambling, protection rackets, and money laundering across the Midwest, his influence stretching through Chicago like a shadow cast by wealth and power. From his penthouse overlooking Navy Pier, he observed the city he controlled with precise calculation. Dominic's reputation for ruthlessness had been cultivated over years of necessity. Emotion was weakness, trust was selective, and any sign of vulnerability could be exploited. He had learned from his father that dehumanizing those beneath him reinforced hierarchy, that cruelty was a tool as reliable as loyalty. The Velvet Room offered the perfect intersection of these 2 lives. Its low lighting, polished wood, and glass accents attracted the city's elite, while its quieter corners accommodated deals and discussions far removed from the public eye. Dominic had claimed his corner booth as territory. From there, he conducted business, monitored associates, and observed those who moved through the lounge. Naomi had been among the staff for 8 months. She did not react to him as most did. She neither flattered nor feared him openly. She maintained her distance with professionalism, serving patrons efficiently while keeping her eyes and thoughts to herself. Her demeanor was quiet but unwavering, a refusal to be intimidated or charmed that set her apart. Dominic noticed her immediately, the way she did not bend to his presence, the subtle tension in her posture when she carried trays of drinks past his booth. Her refusal to perform the expected deference annoyed him, intrigued him, and sparked a quiet assessment that lasted longer than he cared to admit. Naomi represented a challenge he could not purchase or command. She could not be broken with a glance or bought with a tip. In a life accustomed to obedience, her independence was unfamiliar, and he found himself studying her movements, cataloging her routines, and testing her limits, all without revealing the curiosity simmering beneath his controlled exterior. Both operated in worlds defined by pressure and survival, yet the rules they followed were drastically different. Naomi's discipline was invisible, grounded in the management of a fragile body and limited resources. Dominic's discipline was outward, maintained through intimidation and dominance. Their paths intersected nightly at the Velvet Room, a space where appearance mattered and vulnerability was discouraged. Her quiet resilience contrasted sharply with his imposing authority, creating a tension neither fully understood but both could feel. In that crowded lounge, under the dim glow of chandeliers and the murmur of carefully curated conversation, two lives ran parallel, one holding everything in, one controlling everything around him. They were a study in contrast, and the collision of these two worlds was quietly inevitable. For 6 months, Naomi had endured Dominic Castellano's quiet torment. His presence at the bar was never neutral. A snap of his fingers could summon her from across the room, his gray eyes cold and unyielding. He never used her name, treating her as if she were an object placed for convenience. Orders were a game to him, a cocktail requested one way, then changed repeatedly, forcing her to scramble and correct under his exacting gaze. Mistakes, however small, were met with a pointed look or a sigh that drew attention from nearby patrons. On more than one occasion, he cut her off mid-sentence when she tried to speak to customers, leaving her words unfinished and dignity suspended in the air. Money, too, was a weapon. Large bills left on the counter came back with insulting tips, a silent message that generosity was possible, yet intentionally withheld. He and his crew would occupy the lounge for hours, their laughter and conversation loud, creating a presence that made Naomi navigate the space cautiously. Every movement was measured. Every glance had to be precise. She had become hyper-aware of each action, anticipating potential missteps under the scrutiny of a man who thrived on control. Dominic's cruelty was rooted in his world. In organized crime, dominance was maintained through dehumanization. The lessons from his father were clear. Those beneath you existed to serve, and emotion was a liability. Naomi's quiet dignity challenged him. She could not be swayed by intimidation, she did not seek approval, and she never offered flattery. That refusal to bend disrupted his expectations. It forced him to confront a reality where not everything had a price. Her independence unsettled him, and he responded with escalating harshness, a series of tests disguised as indignities. For Naomi, every shift was an endurance trial. Beyond the pressure of his attention, she fought her own invisible battle. Her type 1 diabetes demanded constant vigilance. Blood sugar levels were monitored secretly while she served demanding patrons, fingers occasionally trembling as the insulin coursed through her system. She excused herself to the bathroom when emergency glucose tablets were needed, keeping her illness hidden. Each movement, each sip of drink poured, and every plate carried was calculated. The carbohydrates ingested, the insulin she had taken, the physical exertion required, the stress of handling a difficult customer or Dominic's latest challenge. Financial calculations were equally unforgiving. A dropped bottle or spilled drink translated directly into lost wages. $700 vodka sets or rare liquors meant deductions from her paycheck she could not afford. She was acutely aware that losing this job would jeopardize her apartment, her independence, and her access to insulin. Every day was a careful balance between survival and concealment, a constant negotiation with a body that could betray her at any moment. Even under extreme stress, Naomi remained precise. She hid trembling hands behind the bar, smiled politely when needed, and maintained the professional composure that Dominic tested daily. She became a master of timing and concealment, threading the line between compliance and resistance. Every challenge he imposed required her to calculate more than just the correct drink or the sequence of service. She had to anticipate his temper, manage her own body's unpredictable responses, and perform flawlessly in a space dominated by men who relied on intimidation to assert control. In this environment, Naomi's strength went unnoticed. She operated under pressure that would have undone most people, navigating a dangerous mix of authority and subtle cruelty while fighting her own body's limitations. Dominic's deliberate provocations forced her to refine every aspect of her performance, yet they also masked the deeper challenge she carried every day. His behavior was a test she had no choice but to pass. The stakes were not simply professional, they were a matter of survival. 6 months had passed, and the rhythm of control and endurance had settled into an unspoken pattern. Dominic's dominance pressed constantly, a force against which Naomi measured herself. Each encounter at the bar sharpened her vigilance, her resilience, and her precision. And while his cruelty was calculated and relentless, it failed to break her. Instead, it set the stage for something neither of them could anticipate. A moment that would disrupt the balance they had maintained, forcing him to see her not as a challenge to control, but as a person in need of protection. Naomi had started her day at 6 in the morning, brewing coffee and serving early commuters at a busy cafe in the Loop. There was no pause for breakfast, no time for a proper lunch. By 4 in the afternoon, she was behind the bar at the Velvet Room, shifting seamlessly from one high-pressure environment to another. Her insulin schedule had already been disrupted by the extended morning, and she had skipped meals to save money, carefully rationing every bite and dose. The lounge was alive with tension that night. Dominic's crew from Chicago and their Milwaukee counterparts were gathered for a territorial negotiation, the conversation sharp, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Naomi moved between tables and the bar, balancing drinks, keeping trays level, and anticipating every need. The energy in the room amplified the fatigue she had carried since dawn. Around 11 o'clock, Naomi felt the warning signs she knew so well: trembling fingers, a cold sweat on her forehead, a fog of confusion creeping into her thoughts. Her stomach dropped and her vision tunneled slightly. Hypoglycemia was approaching faster than usual. Her body signaled danger, and she knew the consequences if she ignored it. She had faced these episodes hundreds of times over 15 years, but exhaustion and stress had made this one unusually severe. Type 1 diabetes was relentless. Her immune system had destroyed the insulin-producing cells in her pancreas, a battle that never paused. Managing it required constant attention, monitoring blood sugar, calculating insulin doses, accounting for meals, physical activity, and stress. Low blood sugar, below 70 milligrams per deciliter, was concerning. Drop below 40, and the risk became life-threatening. Shaking, confusion, loss of coordination, seizures, even coma were possible. Every choice, every delay, amplified the danger. Naomi reached for her pocket, fumbling for the orange glucose tablets she always carried. Her fingers shook, misjudging the small package. In her disorientation, her elbow struck the edge of the serving tray. 7 premium vodka bottles crashed to the marble floor, shattering, their contents spreading across the bar. The sound sliced through the ambient chatter, and silence fell. All eyes turned toward her. Patrons froze, witnessing the collapse of not just glass and liquid but also the control she fought to maintain. And then, inevitably, all attention shifted to Dominic. He rose from his corner booth, his gray eyes dark, his sharp suit immaculate except for the brief reflection of the shattered bottles. Those who had been watching knew what to expect. They had seen his outbursts, his precise, calculated rage. Naomi tried to speak. Words failed her. Her lips moved, but only fragments came out. I need. Her legs gave way beneath her, and the bar seemed to tilt. Every motion required more effort than she could muster. Her body betrayed her, fatigue and low blood sugar combining into a weight that pressed her to the floor. Dominic advanced, his associates flanking him, anticipating the reprimand that was supposed to come. The warning in their expressions mirrored countless prior incidents. This was the moment when someone would be broken by the man in the corner booth. Yet something about her condition, the tremors, the sweat, the glazed eyes, stopped him in his tracks. This was not a mistake in service, not a deliberate defiance. This was a medical emergency. Naomi tried to reach the glucose again, fumbling in her apron pocket, uncoordinated. The effects of hypoglycemia were intensifying: confusion, weakness, dizziness. Her breathing grew shallow, and she was acutely aware of the danger she faced if help did not arrive immediately. The lounge remained still, everyone waiting for Dominic's reaction, expecting the usual cruelty. The moment had arrived. A single misstep could have turned into tragedy. Naomi's body had been pushing beyond limits, her illness paired with exhaustion and relentless demands. She could not continue without intervention. The shattering of bottles and the fall to the floor had drawn attention to more than just broken glass. It exposed the invisible struggle she carried every day, hidden from everyone, even from those she served. Dominic rose immediately, the room sensing the shift in energy before his first step. His face was sharp, gray eyes narrowing, every muscle taut. This was the kind of failure he had never tolerated, the type that demanded reprimand, humiliation, a lesson reinforced in silence and fear. He moved toward the bar with the precise purpose of asserting control, his polished shoes sliding across the hardwood floor, rings catching the low light with every motion. His associates followed, poised and attentive, anticipating the verbal assault that was sure to land. Patrons at nearby tables edged back, thankful that the target was not them. The air was thick with expectation, the kind that precedes confrontation. Dominic froze as he neared Naomi. She was not scrambling, not arguing, not even fully aware of his approach. Her hands gripped the bar's edge, trembling violently, her body slick with sweat despite the cool air. Her eyes were unfocused, distant, trying to form words that would not come. I need, she whispered, trailing off, reaching toward her pocket without coordination. Recognition hit him hard. He had seen fear, pain, desperation countless times, but this was not the same. This was medical distress, urgent and beyond blame. In that instant, instinct overtook habit. Predator became protector. Call 911, he barked at one of his associates. Boss, she just dropped some bottles. We don't need. Now. His command cut through the chatter and clinking glass, leaving no room for argument. Naomi's legs gave way. Dominic moved without thought, catching her before she could collapse onto the shards of glass and spilled vodka. She was light in his arms, almost impossibly so, her body trembling against his chest. That was when he saw the bracelet, peeking from beneath her sleeve, type 1 diabetic. The significance hit him immediately, layering every previous irritation with guilt and urgency. Glucose, she managed to whisper. Pocket. Right. His hands, used to breaking bones and handling firearms, shook as he fumbled for the small orange tablets tucked in her apron. He guided them into her mouth, pressing her to chew. Chew, he instructed, voice softening against his will. Stay with me. For 8 minutes, he held her there, among the broken glass and spilled liquor. Each second stretched impossibly long, measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths. His suit was ruined, splattered with vodka, but he did not notice. Nothing else existed except ensuring she stayed conscious, alert, and alive until help arrived. Her lips moved, attempting more words, but they came out as strained murmurs. Dominic kept his focus on her eyes, tracking subtle changes in color and focus, the involuntary tremor in her hands. He barked instructions calmly to his team, directing them with precision even while holding someone as fragile as she was. Paramedics entered, efficiently taking over, but Dominic did not release her immediately. He stepped aside only as they assured her stability and began preparations to transport her safely. Even then he remained nearby, silently assessing every vital, every movement, every response. For the first time in memory, the man who had built an empire on intimidation and control experienced a truth he could not ignore. Power without compassion was meaningless. He had spent months testing her, mocking her, asserting dominance, and yet here, confronted with real vulnerability, every lesson of cruelty dissolved. What remained was a visceral responsibility to protect, to act decisively, to care. The shattered bottles, the ruined bar, the expensive vodka, all of it faded into insignificance against the urgency of her survival. Dominic's priorities had realigned in the space of moments. The world he controlled could wait. The life in his arms demanded attention, and he would meet that demand without hesitation. Dominic sat stiffly in the waiting area of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a place he had never intended to spend more than a passing moment. East Huron Street outside was alive with the usual traffic, Chicago's pulse continuing without regard for what was happening inside. His associates had taken over business matters, but calls went unanswered, schedules disrupted. For a man accustomed to controlling every detail, every hour of his day, this was uncharted territory. He could not leave until he knew she was safe. The waiting room was quiet except for the occasional rustle of papers and the low hum of conversation. Dominic's gaze was fixed on the double doors leading to the emergency area. Each time they opened, his pulse quickened. Minutes stretched longer than they ever should have. Dr. Kapoor appeared, a middle-aged man with signs of long hours etched into his face. His voice was calm, measured, but carried the weight of the news he delivered. Ms. Fletcher experienced severe hypoglycemia. Her blood sugar dropped to 32 milligrams per deciliter. Dominic blinked. He had known she collapsed, but he had not realized how close it had come. Normal range? He asked. 80 to 130, Dr. Kapoor explained. Below 40, there is serious risk, seizures, coma, even death. She's stabilized now, but this is not a single occurrence. Dominic leaned forward, tension coiling through him. Her history. The doctor hesitated briefly, studying Dominic as though weighing how much to reveal. Over the past 2 years, she's had several ER visits. Access to insulin has been irregular. Complications are developing. Retinopathy is evident, and there's early neuropathy in her feet. She's managing this condition without insurance. Dominic processed this silently, his mind racing to quantify what he had just heard. What does she need? Dr. Kapoor regarded him carefully. First, consistent access to insulin and testing supplies. Second, regular meals, reduced stress, adequate rest. Realistically, she also needs proper health coverage, which she does not have. Her current insulin expenses are about $380 per month. She has been rationing doses to make them last. This is extremely dangerous. Dominic's fists tightened. He had watched her serve drinks, perform her shifts, all while unaware of the silent battle she fought every day. Her life had been a constant negotiation with biology, every step and every meal a carefully calculated equation. Type 1 diabetes is a full-time condition, Mr. Castellano, Dr. Kapoor continued. It is not related to lifestyle or willpower. Her pancreas no longer produces insulin. Without it, she will die. Management is complex, costly, and exhausting. Most people cannot imagine the constant mental calculation required just to survive from one day to the next. Something shifted in Dominic then, a realization expanding through his chest. This was not carelessness. This was daily survival, a struggle against her own body. All the cruelty, all the impatience he had directed toward her now collided with the truth. He had watched a woman endure this silent war without recognition, and he had been nothing but a tormentor in her life. Shame, unfamiliar and unwelcome, washed over him. The awareness that he had mocked, ignored, and humiliated someone who was quietly fighting for her life made him restless. The ruthless pride he had cultivated for years felt suddenly hollow. Dr. Kapoor added context that struck even harder. There are approximately 1.9 million Americans living with type 1 diabetes. Among Black patients, complication rates are significantly higher due to systemic inequities in access to healthcare. About 25% of insulin-dependent diabetics report rationing insulin because of cost. This practice leads directly to hospitalizations, worsening complications, and, in some cases, death. Dominic's jaw clenched. The statistics were not abstract, they were Naomi. She was living each of those numbers, enduring a gamble with her life that he had barely comprehended. The condition has been known for over a century, Dr. Kapoor continued, and insulin is relatively inexpensive to manufacture. Yet prices remain high, creating barriers for those who need it most. Dominic's thoughts raced. The life of someone he had considered insignificant, even irritating, had been threatened by financial and systemic pressures he had never noticed. And he had added to it, in his own way, through neglect, impatience, and disregard. He thought back to the moment she collapsed, how fragile she had seemed in his arms, the tremor in her hands, the desperation in her whisper for glucose. The memory clung to him, and for the first time, he understood the full scope of what she had been enduring silently. Every shift, every demanding customer, every long day of skipped meals, every rationed dose of insulin. He had witnessed her resilience but had interpreted it as endurance for his amusement, as though her suffering were part of his game. The weight of the realization settled in his chest. It was not enough to simply keep her alive in that moment. He could not undo the months of cruelty, but he could begin to change the conditions that threatened her life. He could provide resources, care, and protection, even if it meant surrendering some control he had always considered absolute. Dr. Kapoor's gaze met his again. This isn't just about medicine, Mr. Castellano. It's about ensuring daily survival is possible, and that she can navigate her life without putting herself in danger for lack of basic resources. That is a responsibility that goes beyond traditional support. It requires consistency, understanding, and vigilance. Dominic nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Her condition was relentless, unforgiving, and utterly invisible to the casual observer. It demanded attention and foresight, not punishment or mockery. Every strategy he had used to assert power was now irrelevant in the face of this reality. In that waiting room, he made an unspoken promise to himself. The bar, the empire, the calculated intimidation, they could all wait. The immediate priority was her life, and that meant a shift in perspective, a recognition of vulnerability as a truth rather than a weakness. He could no longer act without awareness, no longer assume strength was optional. For the first time, Dominic felt the tension of responsibility without reward. There was no gain in being vigilant for her needs beyond the preservation of life itself. Yet in that tension, he discovered a new understanding of what power could mean. Not dominance, not fear, but protection. He leaned back in the chair, exhausted yet alert, contemplating the hours ahead. Naomi's recovery would require planning, consistency, and attention that had no precedent in his life. Every detail mattered, from timely insulin doses to balanced meals, from monitoring glucose levels to reducing stress triggers. He had been confronted with a reality that could not be manipulated with money, influence, or force. Biology was absolute, and he had no choice but to respect it. In the quiet of the hospital waiting area, Dominic Castellano, man of calculated cruelty and ruthless control, encountered a form of power he had never known. It demanded humility, care, and vigilance. The shift in his understanding was profound. For the first time, he realized that seeing someone's full struggle and choosing to act on it could define a man more than any empire built on fear ever could. Naomi blinked against the early morning light filtering through the hospital room windows. Her head felt heavy, her throat dry, each breath a reminder of how close she had come to not waking at all. She had expected visitors, maybe family, a friend, or a concerned coworker, but not him. Dominic Castellano sat in the visitor's chair beside her bed, suit still stained with vodka from the night before. He looked out of place in the sterile room, yet somehow entirely at home. Naomi's voice cracked as she croaked, "What are you doing here?" He didn't smile. The sharp edge she had known was gone. "Making sure you don't die," he said simply. Her eyes narrowed in disbelief. You're my worst nightmare. You were the last person I expected to see." "I don't do surprises," he muttered, leaning back. The tone was not mocking, It lacked the cruelty she had come to anticipate. I just stayed. Naomi's exhaustion returned full force, and she felt her body tremble as it had the night before. Then he said the words she didn't see coming, "You're fired." The words hit like a physical blow. Her chest tightened, panic rising. Losing this job meant losing rent money, access to insulin, her ability to survive. Her voice wavered, barely audible. "Please. I can't. I need that job." Dominic raised a hand, stopping her before the pleading could go further. "But you're hired for something else," he said, leaning forward, voice firm but measured. Naomi's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "You will," he said, eyes fixed on hers. "I need someone who can read people, stay calm under pressure, and keep their mouth shut. You will work for me directly. Health insurance included. Salary enough to cover your medical expenses and living costs." Her mind tried to process this. The words didn't fit. She was dazed, exhausted, and still reeling from the memory of collapsing on the marble floor. I don't understand," she repeated. "Neither do I," he admitted, a sound she had never heard from him before, uncertainty. His voice carried a weight that startled her. "I watched you collapse because you couldn't afford to take care of yourself while serving drinks to people like me. That's unacceptable." Naomi's lips parted, searching for words. "That's what?" He shook his head slowly. "Unacceptable. What happened to you, what you've been forced to endure, it shouldn't have happened." He stopped, glanced away briefly, then back. "I want to fix it if I can." Silence stretched between them. Naomi tried to form a coherent thought, the room feeling suddenly too small, too quiet. She had been hiding this for so long, and now the man who had tormented her for months seemed different. Finally, he asked, "Why did you never tell anyone?" Naomi considered carefully. She had spent years learning which battles were worth fighting, which vulnerabilities could survive exposure. "Because the world doesn't have much patience for sick black women," she said quietly. He didn't interrupt, waiting for her to continue. "We're supposed to be strong. Endure everything. Never complain. The moment you show you're struggling, people treat you like you're broken or making excuses. I learned early that my illness was my problem to manage, not anyone else's burden." Dominic's eyes darkened, a shadow of remorse crossing his features. "That's bullshit," he said bluntly. "Maybe," she admitted, her voice steadying. "But it kept me employed. Independent." "And nearly killed you on my floor," he countered, voice low but firm. The weight of that truth hung in the room. She had been so close to death, and he had been standing there watching, then suddenly aware in a way that made him almost unrecognizable. He asked the questions he had never considered before. "How long have you been rationing insulin?" "About a year and a half," she said quietly. "I lost my insurance when the coffee shop cut my hours. Couldn't afford Cobra continuation. Started skipping doses, stretching supplies. Knew it was dangerous, but," her voice trailed off, the calculation of life against necessity unspoken. Dominic's jaw tightened. 18 months. She had been playing a daily game with her life while he had sneered, ignored, insulted, and treated her like furniture. Every insult, every humiliation, every sting of indifference was now unbearable to him in its new context. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, almost to himself. "I had no idea." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't see. You couldn't see. Nobody ever does. The world keeps moving, and people assume you're fine until something catastrophic happens. Until now." Dominic leaned back, processing, his expression unreadable. He had always relied on observation, manipulation, intimidation. Yet nothing he had known prepared him for this revelation, that she had been surviving against odds far greater than any challenge his empire could throw at him. And he had contributed to her stress, oblivious. "You've been fighting for your life quietly for years," he said finally, voice low, almost reverent. While I treated you as if your only value was to pour drinks and keep quiet." Naomi's eyes brimmed with tears she could not contain. She had spent so long managing alone, maintaining a facade of competence while her body waged war internally. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt inadequate. Dominic's tone softened further. I can't erase what I've done. But I can make sure from now on, you never have to fight alone. I can't undo the months, the hardship, the risks. But I can change the conditions. That's all I can offer. She swallowed hard, the exhaustion and relief combining into a heavy lump in her throat. I don't know how to even begin to accept that, she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He studied her, tracing the faint scars of stress and fatigue etched into her features. You don't have to, he said finally. I just need you to survive. That's step one. The silence settled, this time different. Less oppressive, more contemplative. In that room, amidst the sterile smells of disinfectant and the soft beeping of monitors, a shift had occurred. The man who had been cruelty incarnate was now someone else entirely, forced into an unfamiliar role, protector. Naomi spoke next, voice quiet but steady. I rationed because I had no choice. Every month, I had to decide between food, insulin, and rent. I learned to survive on impossible odds. Every day, I calculated the risk, measured what I had against what I needed, and hoped I wouldn't fall too far behind. Dominic's face remained somber, the enormity of her words weighing on him. He realized that the very person he had sought to dominate, to control through fear, had been demonstrating courage and resourcefulness he had never credited. Her resilience had nothing to do with charm, obedience, or flattery. It was purely the act of survival, against an indifferent system, against poverty, and against her own biology. You've been gambling with your life, he said softly, almost disbelievingly. And I treated you like furniture, like something I could disregard. Yes, she said, voice low. And I survived. Barely. Dominic swallowed, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. I am sorry. Naomi blinked. The apology was unexpected, genuine, and unpracticed. It wasn't dramatic, not performative. It was simply a recognition of reality, acknowledgement of her struggle, and a promise of change. The room felt different after that, as though something invisible had shifted. The power dynamic that had defined their interactions for months had been disrupted, not by charm, not by flattery, but by truth. And in that disruption, a new form of connection began to emerge. Recognition, accountability, and a nascent willingness to protect rather than harm. Dominic leaned back in the chair, observing her quietly. He did not know what the future held, or how they would navigate it. But he had made a decision. Her survival, her dignity, her life, would no longer be secondary to his amusement or ego. That alone was the beginning of a transformation he hadn't anticipated, one that would redefine the way he interacted with everyone, but most importantly with her. Over the following weeks, Dominic became consumed by a single, unfamiliar obsession, understanding type 1 diabetes. For someone whose empire relied on knowing every detail about everyone around him, his ignorance on this subject irritated him more than he expected. He read medical journals, patient blogs, and watched educational videos late into the night. He learned that her body was engaged in a relentless autoimmune attack, systematically destroying the insulin-producing cells of her pancreas. No amount of money, no display of dominance, could bend biology to his will. This was unfamiliar territory. Dominic was used to commanding environments, predicting reactions, and manipulating outcomes. Here, he was powerless. Yet this newfound vulnerability frustrated and fascinated him in equal measure. He had spent decades controlling people and situations. Now, he was learning to respond to a force entirely beyond control. Dominic began assembling a system designed to ensure Naomi's survival. He hired the best endocrinologist in Chicago, arranging consultations at University of Chicago Medicine on East 57th Street. Continuous glucose monitors were installed, devices that would track her blood sugar in real time and send alerts to her phone, and to his. A personal chef prepared meals with exact carbohydrate counts. Her work schedule was redesigned for flexibility, allowing rest whenever needed and medical appointments without penalty. Naomi's role evolved too. She now attended Dominic's meetings, reading clients, associates, and rivals alike, assessing honesty and reliability. But Dominic's real education came in observing the logistics of her life, the silent battles she had waged for years. He learned that she pricked her fingers at least 10 times daily and administered a minimum of 4 insulin injections. Over 15 years, that amounted to more than 75,000 needle sticks. Every meal required meticulous calculation, carbohydrates measured, insulin dosages adjusted, exercise accounted for, stress factored in, sleep patterns considered, hormones monitored. She juggled infinite variables while the rest of the world moved obliviously around her. He began to see vulnerability differently. It was no longer weakness to him, it was a human condition he had long ignored. Each time he checked that she had eaten, each time he recognized the subtle cues of her body, the distant look signaling high blood sugar, trembling hands signaling low, he internalized a lesson in empathy. Watching her inject insulin without flinching, with a steady hand honed over 15 years, forced him to confront a resilience he had never credited anyone with. One evening, the weight of this lesson pressed on him in a new way. They were at his Navy Pier penthouse, the room illuminated by the fading glow of sunset over Lake Michigan. Naomi was testing her blood sugar before dinner, a routine he now observed quietly, respectfully. She pricked her finger, collected the blood drop, read the meter, and logged the number. Dominic studied her movements, precise and practiced. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Every time," she countered, eyes meeting his. "You get used to it," she said, marking the reading in her logbook. He exhaled slowly. 10 finger pricks a day, 4 injections minimum. That's over 5,000 needle sticks a year. "You've been doing this 15 years. Naomi nodded. 75,000 times. Just to survive. The weight of that number settled over him like a physical force. He realized the casual cruelty of assuming life was simple. For her, it was a series of calculations, constant vigilance and endurance. He had mocked her, ignored her distress, and treated her as insignificant, never recognizing the invisible battles she fought daily. The realization forced a reckoning with his past behavior, each insult and slight now magnified by context. Dominic's education extended beyond the individual to the systemic. He discovered that Black Americans with type 1 diabetes faced higher complication rates due to disparities in healthcare access, implicit bias, and systemic inequities. Millions of Americans rationed insulin because they could not afford it, risking hospitalization, irreversible complications, and death. The pharmaceutical companies that manufactured insulin had created a monopoly that priced life-saving medication at more than 10 times the cost of production. Naomi's struggle was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of systemic failure in a nation that prided itself on wealth and resources. The scope of her daily reality and the structural injustice surrounding it shifted Dominic fundamentally. He began implementing safeguards that extended beyond convenience. He coordinated regular medical reviews, oversaw the use of the continuous glucose monitor, and worked with Naomi on stress management strategies. Exercise, meals, and sleep were monitored with precision. What had started as curiosity evolved into active participation in her well-being. He also observed her emotional endurance. She remained composed, quiet, and focused, even under immense pressure. At meetings, she could read a room, detect deception, and offer insights that Dominic had previously discounted. Her strength was not performative, it was embedded in her daily survival. He began seeing her resilience as a skill, one honed through necessity, requiring discipline, courage, and intelligence. Dominic's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. He began checking on her proactively, anticipating her needs rather than reacting to crises. He learned to recognize patterns. Fatigue meant low blood sugar or skipped meals. Anxiety in meetings sometimes triggered glucose spikes. He adjusted his expectations, his schedule, and even his own behavior to accommodate her needs. He discovered that care required patience, observation, and humility, concepts he had historically disregarded. One evening, after another long day, they sat together reviewing glucose logs in his penthouse. Dominic's eyes lingered on her fingers, steady despite years of repeated pricks. He watched the meter readout, absorbed the numbers, and finally spoke. "I never understood how much of your life is spent just keeping yourself alive. All these years, and I treated you like you didn't matter." Naomi did not reply immediately. She continued recording the data, her calm focus a quiet testament to her resilience. "It's what I had to do," she said finally. "I didn't have a choice." He leaned back, the enormity of her words sinking in. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone." For the first time, Dominic contemplated vulnerability as a structural reality, not merely a personal failing. He understood that his past cruelty had intersected with systemic failures, compounding risk for someone already forced into precarious survival. His approach shifted from transactional control to active stewardship, from observation to intervention, from dominance to responsibility. Their interactions became routine but meaningful. He ensured she had regular meals, insulin supplies, and scheduled check-ins with medical professionals. He created redundancies, emergency glucose tabs in her bag, alerts to his phone for abnormal readings, contingency plans for every potential scenario. Naomi's independence remained intact, but the safety net was no longer a fantasy. He was the anchor. By witnessing her daily life, Dominic internalized lessons in patience, respect, and accountability. He saw that true strength did not always manifest in physical dominance or fear. Sometimes, it existed quietly in survival against relentless odds, in the management of invisible crises, and in the endurance of hardship with dignity intact. Through observation, participation, and adaptation, Dominic's worldview shifted fundamentally. He no longer measured worth solely by compliance, intimidation, or fear. He began to see people, especially Naomi, in their full complexity, resilient, resourceful, human. And with this understanding came the beginnings of genuine care, a protective instinct grounded not in obligation or desire for control, but in recognition of vulnerability and value. 6 months had passed since the night Naomi collapsed at the Velvet Room. The city was just waking as they walked along the Lincoln Park lakefront trail, early morning light brushing the Chicago skyline in soft gold. Dominic and Naomi moved side by side, a simple gesture that would have been unthinkable half a year ago. The air smelled of water and fresh grass, calm and unthreatening, in contrast to the controlled chaos Dominic was used to orchestrating. Naomi glanced at her phone, checking the reading from her continuous glucose monitor, 127 milligrams per deciliter. Stable. Safe. She allowed herself a small smile. "You know," she said, voice light, "6 months ago I never imagined this. Walking peacefully, not worried about the next shift, next insulin payment, or next medical crisis." Dominic exhaled slowly. "6 months ago, I was a different person," he admitted, eyes on the lake ahead. Naomi glanced at him, challenging gently. "Are you though? You still run the same business, make the same choices in that world." The words hit harder than any rival's threat ever had. Dominic considered them carefully. Caring for one person while maintaining an empire built on exploitation created a dissonance he had never faced. He paused, tracing the water's edge with his gaze. "I don't have answers," he said finally. "But I'm asking questions I never asked before. That has to count for something." "It does," Naomi said, her voice soft but certain. "Transformation doesn't happen all at once. But it has to start somewhere." Dominic thought about the changes he had already made. At restaurants and coffee shops, he addressed staff by name, said please and thank you. Tips were generous, no longer calculated as a show of power. His crew had noticed the shift, some uncomfortable, some incredulous, but he didn't care. He had begun to question the human cost embedded in his operations. Protection rackets, loan sharking, businesses crushed by fear and debt, all of it now carried weight in his mind. The faces of the people he had ignored, dismissed, or intimidated could no longer be erased. Yet, Dominic did not abandon his world. Violence, money, and influence remained part of his life. But he began to see them differently, weighing the impact of each decision on those beneath him. Empathy, he realized, was a skill that could be reclaimed even after years of suppression. It required attention, conscious effort, and repetition. The lessons he had learned from Naomi's daily reality had transformed his perspective. Invisible battles are real. Just because suffering isn't visible doesn't mean it isn't consuming someone entirely. Power without empathy is cruelty. The measure of a person is how they treat those with less. Healthcare is a human right. No one should ration life-saving medication because of cost. Vulnerability is courageous, and revealing it can create connection instead of weakness. Transformation requires action, not merely recognition of guilt. Systemic problems cannot be solved by one person, but sustainable, consistent care makes a tangible difference. Naomi herself had begun to change. She learned to accept help without feeling like a burden. Vulnerability no longer only exposed her, it also allowed connection, trust, and understanding. Her health had stabilized, insulin doses were consistent, meals were scheduled, stress was reduced. The progression of retinopathy in her eyes had halted. She was thriving, no longer merely surviving. Her new role in Dominic's operations reflected her intelligence rather than mere service. She read people, assessed honesty, and offered insight during business meetings. Dominic trusted her judgment in ways he trusted very few others. She became indispensable, not through subservience but through skill, awareness, and resilience. Daily routines remained. Type 1 diabetes did not vanish. She still monitored glucose, counted carbohydrates, and administered injections. But now, these tasks were undertaken within a framework of support, reliable access to insulin, nutritional oversight, real-time monitoring, and contingency planning. The daily calculations were still hers, but the risk of life-threatening consequences had drastically decreased. Dominic's past persisted. Organized crime did not disappear overnight. Deals continued, threats were managed, power was maintained. Yet, within this familiar world, he approached decisions with newfound caution, aware of human cost and moral consequence. He was learning to balance ruthlessness with responsibility, control with empathy. As they walked along the trail, passing joggers and cyclists, Dominic noticed the subtle changes in himself. He observed patience, restraint, and care surfacing where once there was only dominance and aggression. His instinct to intimidate had diminished when he recognized that understanding and protection could be more powerful than fear. What happens next? Naomi asked quietly, watching the water lap at the shoreline. I don't know, Dominic admitted, a trace of humility in his tone. But whatever it is, we figure it out together. It was not a promise of a perfect future, nor a guarantee of safety in a world defined by danger and power. It was a commitment to choose differently, to act with care rather than cruelty, one moment at a time. To continue learning, growing, and questioning, even when it challenged everything he had believed. To use influence for protection rather than exploitation, for understanding rather than fear. The lakefront widened before them, and the city's hum began to build. Boats heading out onto Lake Michigan, traffic growing along Lakeshore Drive, the pulse of Chicago waking. Two people from radically different worlds, connected by crisis, now transformed by care. Their bond was not conventional, not simplistic, but it was real, grounded in lived experience, choice, and shared understanding. This story extended beyond Dominic and Naomi. It served as a mirror for viewers to examine how they treated vulnerable populations, how systems failed those in need, and how empathy could be recovered even in the most hardened hearts. The questions remained for everyone listening. Who have I dismissed? Whose struggles have I ignored? When given power, how do I use it? Am I perpetuating harm through indifference? What would it take to truly see someone I've overlooked? Change was possible, even for those who seemed irredeemable. Empathy could be learned, strengthened, and acted upon. One person's decision to care could save a life. Witnessing someone's full humanity could transform one's own. The path back to moral clarity and emotional connection often began with truly seeing another's struggle. And sometimes, the person we had dismissed, ignored, or undervalued could be the one who taught us what it meant to be human. As they continued walking, the city fully waking around them, Dominic and Naomi moved in silence, comfortable in the rhythm of coexistence and newfound trust. Every step a reminder that real transformation was not about perfect endings, but about choosing differently whenever the opportunity arose. One day, one choice, one act of care at a time. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson hit you hardest. Tomorrow we're bringing another story that will challenge how you see the world, and your support. Your likes, your comments, your shares, helps us bring these important stories to more people. Thank you for being part of this community.